Hello, and welcome to, well, welcome to the after action battle report of the Battle of Trafalgar. Happened 216 years ago on the 21st, and today is the 23rd. Today, I have all sorts of random things going on, and that's the point. The world goes on. You have a big battle, it's a big battle, but the world goes on afterwards. Currently, topics of discussion going on are China and whether or not they realize they would actually invade Taiwan because of the consequences, and surely they understand the consequences. Well, actually, that's a rather good point for talking about the Battle of Trafalgar, because you could say the same thing about Napoleon. He's a powerful general. He is a leader of one of the most powerful nations on earth in the 1800s, in the late 1790s. Surely he understands the consequences of this kind of operation, the difficulties, the impracticalities of the Trafalgar campaign and of the battle, and surely he will understand what can go wrong. The answer is no, he doesn't. That doesn't occur to his metric. He will also try and push various forms of economic policy which are supposed to stop the British being part of the continental trade, that appropriately called the continental system. And he'll come up with other ideas as well, all of which are designed to destroy the nation of shopkeepers, which is how he likes to describe Britain. It doesn't work. It was never going to work. We're talking about the Battle of Trafalgar in a long patrol, and the first thing you have to realize is the traditional saga goes, yes, it was the brilliant Royal Navy 27 ships versus the French Franco-Spanish force of 33. But if they'd come out a couple of days earlier, actually, pretty much when Napoleon first orders them to come out, they would have had Rear Admiral Lewis's squadron, which is another 5 ships. They would have had Calder and his flagship, HMS Prince of Wales, there. So Nelson's fleet would have been 33 ships versus the Franco-Spanish 33 ships. At which point, the whole mantra of Britain coming from behind, looking so weak and defeating this mighty force, would kind of not work, as it would have been 33 ships versus 33 ships. And the sheer number of second rates in the British force, whilst, yes, the Franco-Spanish force had more first rates, about 4 to 3, the fact they had no second rates, and the fact that the British would have had roughly 5 of them, would have made up for that significantly. It would certainly have caused a lot of trouble for them. You could go further. There is the Strachan force that being led by Commodore Strachan, a few ships, about 5, wandering around, hunting for the Aquilan force, the Rochefort squadron, which is out hunting and will eventually, as mentioned in the campaign video, find an enemy fleet, find what it thinks is a convoy, and turns out to be HMS Calcutta, which draws them away from the convoy. She gets captured. They get an Indiaman. The convoy gets through fine. That's a converted ship, an Indiaman. if that force, which wasn't a million miles away, and for want of a single decision by Strachan in terms of his direction, could well have been sailing right past during the battle, especially if it had happened in timeline with the other vessels being. You could be talking about a Royal Navy Royal Navy fleet of 38 ships attacking the Franco-Spanish force of 33. All these are variations on luck. Calder going away. Well, that's his ego. But it's a coin toss. He could have decided that the best way to protect his ego, protect his reputation, was to stay and fight. Certainly he's beseeched to by Nelson and Collingwood. Rear Admiral Louis and his squadron. He goes to Gibraltar to get supplies. He then gets ordered by other instructions from the Admiralty to escort a convoy into the Mediterranean. But if those orders hadn't arrived before he'd left, or hadn't arrived then, or hadn't come just been delayed, or even if someone had made the decision not to, then he would have gone back to Nelson with supplies, like he was supposed to. The point I'm making is this. The Battle of Trafalgar shouldn't have happened. And it should not have happened the way it did. Because by any of those rules of metric and those rules of consequences. Because if Napoleon understood about naval warfare, he'd know what an amazing thing it was Villeneuve had managed to get out in the first place. And back. And he'd have thought, I can withdraw them to Mediterranean. That's the orders he eventually gives them. Or I can leave them there and maybe give them all, and their fleet in being. That's going to force the British to have to sit at 2 fleets in the Atlantic coast all winter. And then in spring, I'll do something. Because that would have caused a lot more trouble. And please don't invade. Don't invade Spain in that time and cause trouble in Spain, because then you'll lose the whole fleet. He could have done that. That would have been a perfectly sensible thing. Sending Rosilli to replace Villeneuve, and Villeneuve getting stung into sailing. Well, that's Villeneuve actually deciding to sail and actually having the weather to sail, and the excuse, the information about Louis' squadron, Admiral Louis' squadron being in Gibraltar, therefore a significant weakening of the British fleet, are all coincidences of luck. Again, you could argue that Nelson was again trying to bluff like he had earlier in the campaign, which had let Villeneuve out of Toulon. He'd sent a squadron away, and so it would be seen in Gibraltar. But just his intention was that they would come back to him quickly. And they could have been back in time. The point is, Napoleon's the person in charge. He has no idea what's going on or the realities of the consequences that he's ordering. He really doesn't understand naval warfare. He really doesn't understand these things. What he understands is the French political system and how to win battles on land, most of the time, under the correct circumstances where he can organize his forces. Do not presume your opponent, and this is the good thing about the Napoleonic Wars and the War of the Third Coalition, at no point did the British government presume Napoleon understands the same amount of things as they do. They don't think him stupid. They never presume him stupid. But they also do not presume that he will view the world and events the same way as they will. They do not presume their opponent will have the same interpretation of these things. And that's just as pertinent whoever you are in the world. Do never presume your opponent has the same view as you do. Right, a little note before we get into the full thing. I have a Spreadshirt store. Now, this is mainly coming up because when I launched this, I put up this Blackburn picture. This is the design, Blackburn design. And when my aunt saw it, she said, well, if you get to 13,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2021, I will, and your uncle will, take a photo of us wearing Blackburn face masks. And you'll be able to put it up in your cruise ships on the 2nd of January. So, that's the challenge. So far, I'm about, I think, 6,800 or something. So, it will need a lot of help from you if I'm to get there. But there are also some new designs, including the Trafalgar theme. There is a special poster. In fact, there are now 3 posters. There's a unicorn poster, there's a Blackburn and Catalina poster, and a Trafalgar themed poster, which has both Euryalus and Africa on it. And, well, they're cool. I think. I designed them myself, so I must think they're cool. Anyway, leaving that to one side, let's get into the battle. This, of course, is one of the most famous reasons for the War of the Third Coalition. It is the death of the Duc d'Enghien, who is one of the reasons why I really don't like Napoleon. Because all those things he brings in that he gets this credit for, this rule of law, this code, all these things, don't count when he just wants someone dead. And he doesn't even, that person hasn't even done anything he's accused of. He's just a potential threat because he's got some Bourbon blood. And he's young. He's not a good general. He's not a good anything, really. He's just young, Bourbon, potentially recently married. And he has him killed. He dresses it up, but he sends cavalry into another country that surround his house, drag him out, take him back to France, where he is arraigned in front of a court of military officers. He's not really allowed to defend himself. They convict him with no evidence, even by standards of the day, and shoot it. Order him executed. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have much faith in any of your high ideals and claims when you do that. After all, it's not the standards we espouse to others which define us, it's the standards we hold ourselves to. I'm not saying any of the people in the red corner were that great either. They're not. It's just, no. Red corner, we have the Holy Roman Empire, we have Great Britain, which will introduce income tax to pay for this war. And actually, yes, already in Napoleonic Wars. Russia, Naples, Sicily, and Sweden. Let's get back. On the blue corner, we have the first of the French Republic, and then after 1804, the first French Empire. We have when someone goes from being a first consul, to emperor. Very Caesarian. Latvian Republic, which is basically the Netherlands, ruled from France. Italy, which is a chunk of Italy, ruled from France. Spain, Bavaria, Württemberg, and Etruria, which is another area of Italy, which is semi-independent, but also to an extent ruled from France. And of course, there's Naples and Sicily, which are also part of modern Italy, but are separate at this point. Italy hasn't been through its unification wars yet. Let's just leave it at that. So, the Wars of the Coalition. Well, there's been the War of the First Coalition, which was 1792 to 1797, but Spain switched sides in 1796. Then the War of the Second Coalition, which is November 1798 to March 1802. Basically, the period between October 1797 and November 1798 can best be described as the sort of peace where everyone involved is rapidly ordering as many sharp, pointy things as they can get their hands on. I'm not talking just guns. No. Muskets, rifles, cannon, everything like that. No, they're not. They're ordering those, but they're also ordering every single sharp, pointy thing they can get their hands on. Bayonets, swords, lances, the lot. Boat hooks, very nasty boarding pikes. All those things are being ordered at a rapid, and I mean a rapid pace. And that goes on till March 1802. And then you have a gap of, this is fun, till May 1803. And again, it's... No one actually... The thing is, there is peace declared, and it's the sort of peace where, yay, we've got peace. Now, can we order double the number of guns we ordered last year? Are we able to get that? This means we can get the convoys through without any trouble. We'll still escort them just in case. Yes. Are we actually going to a peace footing in any way, shape, or form? No, not really at all. No. We're going to get many ships back down from, commission to ordinary. No. We're probably going to copper a few more bottoms as quickly as we can and clean hulls as quickly as we can. So is anything really changing? No. Okay. This is the period you're living in. This is the second 100 Years of War period. This is... I'll explain it. Okay. So, whenever you start talking about this period, there is a lot of thing based on, people are promoted by patronage and all these things. That is true. There is a lot of patronage involved. However, for armies, there is, even though you buy or commission those sort of things, there is a small thing called frequent wars, which does tend to have a salutary effect on eliminating your worst idiots. It does so now. For navies, especially in the case of the Royal Navy, there is a lieutenant's exam, which you have to get, which includes your ability to navigate and all those things. There is the sea itself, which has a habit of killing you off. And there is the actual fighting, which also has a habit of killing you off. Or by one of two methods. You either get killed in the fighting, or if you don't fight well enough, you find yourself not getting a promotion no matter how senior you are. Or senior or loved by various families you are. So, yes, patronage exists, but it's more of a problem in peacetime, and really, there isn't enough peacetime for it to have the impact it has on, let's say, the Navy in the 1840s to 1860s. Okay? This is the trouble. We sometimes, because of the mid to late Victorian Navy, because of its legacy, we get the image of that going back earlier. But the fact is, there are enough wars, enough big storms, and enough difficulty passing the exams that, whilst, yes, you do get some very interesting promotions, they are actually, by and large, less frequent than we might presume, especially from the world of television and movies, or even books. This, therefore, has an impact, an interesting effect on French strategy, which let's go over quickly. This is what leads, of course, to the Battle of Trafalgar. The fleets have been going out to try and execute this, and now they're trying to be withdrawn. The theme: invade Britain with 200,000 troops. Well, that sounds like a capital idea. Invade what is possibly the most heavily fortified nation on Earth at this point, because they've been building fortifications for years, because you've kept threatening to invade them, and they've been through multiple invasion squares since, well, Henry VIII, who started building artillery forts, which you can still see and are manned at this point. They have personnel in them with cannon. You want to have a look at a good one, go down to Pendennis and St. Mawes. They're in Foul Bay in Cornwall. Hypothesis: let us be master of the channel for 6 hours and be master of the world. Well, that's not likely. You're not going to get 200,000 troops across the sea in 6 hours. You are not going to be able to. It's not going to be as coordinated, as organized as that. And any amphibious assault in this period, especially with that many of troops, means they're going to land disparately and broken up. Which means they're going to have to deal with the locals, the local, whatever militia is locally there, and whatever regular units are there. And there are lots of them being raised for that deal. And also, there's going to be the Royal Navy, but we'll leave that. They've got a plan for that. Phase 1. The Brest and the Toulon Franco-Spanish fleets break out from the British blockade. The Toulon fleet is supposed to meet up with the Spanish fleet at Cartagena and Cadiz and draw them across. So that's why I call it the Franco-Spanish fleet. But basically, the Toulon fleet is supposed to gather them under its wings and break out from the British blockade, which are led at Brest by Collingwood and Toulon by Nelson, 2 admirals known for their inattentiveness. Oh, no, sorry. Wrong admirals. 2 admirals known for their attentiveness to detail. Phase 2. The combined fleet will sail across the Atlantic to threaten the West Indies. This, Napoleon believes, would surely draw all of the Royal Navy under William Cornwallis to defend the West Indies. So basically, the idea is the entire Western Approaches fleet, all the Channel fleet, everything, will sail across the West Indies, chasing the French fleet. He's not wrong. There, a significant squadron might well be sent, would probably be sent after them, and after the Brest fleet and after the Toulon fleet. And there's already a squadron out there. But they might find that even if they do elude them, then they come back and find another squadron waiting for them. We'll leave that to one side, but carry on. The Toulon and Brest fleets under Pierre-Charles Villeneuve and Honoré Joseph Antoine Gantemot, respectively, would rendezvous at Martinique. Lovely, apart from Diamond Rock is at this point already under control and commissioned as the sloop HMS Diamond Rock. Don't get me started. The poor officer who surrenders actually has to go for a court-martial about why he surrenders his ship. They actually talk about it, surrendering your ship. And at no point does anyone in the court-martial think, we're actually talking about an island here that was off the main enemy port. But he gets acquitted and gets considered he did everything he could to not surrender his ship. The fact that the ship in question was huge, stone, and couldn't move and running out of water, we'll leave to one side. Phase 4. Combined fleets would then quickly sail back across the Atlantic to Europe. Once again, they would elude any pursuing British fleet, so they wouldn't fight a battle in the West Indies. They would form up together, manage to revictual their ships massively quickly, and then manage to elude the British to come back again. And the British would not realise where they're going. Then they would land a force in Ireland, because that's always a quick operation, as in the 2 French revolutionary invasions of Ireland, 1796 to 1798. And then phase 6, defeat what parts of the Channel fleet had remained in the Channel, because they're going to offer a battle if they're facing overwhelming force. They're not going to do a fleet and being strategy as Lord Tonnington had years previously, or they're not going to be reinforced, and you're suddenly going to find yourself in another form of a Trafalgar scenario. with your fleet just having done 2 rapid Atlantic crossings rather one on top of each other. So the ships are probably not in the greatest condition. Finally, I'm trying to avoid him. What can I say? Phase 7, defend the channel and transport the invasion fleet. All before the RN could bring in any more fleets to strip them, to stop them. So that chasing fleet, you must have beaten the channel, whatever's in the channel fleet, and get them before the chasing fleet realizes which way you were going. Because of course the chasing fleet won't immediately thought, "Hang on, we lost them. Where they're going? Oh, sugar! They'll be trying invasion of England," and piled on sail themselves and sailed as fast as they could across the North Atlantic. And the point I'll make quickly by flicking through to about here, chase phase. Okay, Nelson starts after Villeneuve to get across, but almost catches up with him in the West Indies. And actually gets across to Gibraltar faster than Villeneuve gets across to Ferrol, where he's aiming for. Actually, he ends up going to Cadiz, but we'll leave that to one side. And Cape Finisterre. And there's already another squadron the Royal Navy has waiting at Cape Finisterre for him. That's under Admiral Calder. This is a not a good plan. Okay, it's not a good strategy. It's not a good plan. So this comes from Napoleon. And I am always fair, so I will give you 2 quotes. There is Professor Andrew Roberts, who wrote this in his 2014 biography. The ideas underpin our modern world: meritocracy, equality before the law, property rights, religious toleration, modern secular education, sound finances, and so on were championed, consolidated, confided, and geographically extended by Napoleon. To them he added a rational and efficient local administration, an end to rural banditry, the encouragement of science and the arts, and the abolition of feudalism, and the greatest codification of law since the fall of the Roman Empire. You can certainly make that case. I'm not sure if the Duc d'Enghien would agree with equality before the law or any toleration or of those things, and I'm not sure if some other people would agree with some of these statements as well, but you can certainly make that case. And a dashing gentleman called Dr. Clarke wrote, when writing this presentation, this comes from a presentation earlier, in 2020, Napoleon has good press. He achieves a lot, but is also quite possibly one of the most narcissistic people to ever run a state. He was probably an above-average general, although not the best in his own army. André Massena and Louis-Nicole Deveau were better, in my opinion, than quite most people have, actually, it seems. And whilst an able tactician, he was not a great long-term strategist, whose failings in that area led to him consistently misunderstanding, misusing, and underestimating the value of sea power. That's enough said about Napoleon. Okay, British strategy. Twofold. Build defences at home. Already mentioned those. Martelotaz, defence of Dover, build a military canal, and training militia's army units as well as they could be. All lovely. All done. And secondly, wherever the French or Spanish ships are, and you've probably noticed this thing already, there will be Royal Navy. And this is at one point during the year of 1805, there was a combined French and Dutch squadron of 9 ships of the line were quartered in the Netherlands, and this was covered by Admiral Lord Keith's Down squadron of 11 ships of the line. 3 or 4 ships of the line at Rochefort were blockaded by Rear Admiral Thomas Graves with 5 ships of the line. They weren't quite sure. They'd get out at some points. A combined fleet of 4 French ships of the line under Rear Admiral Gordon and 8 ships of the line under Admiral Gandalina were watched at Ferrol by Vice Admiral Robert Calder with 8 ships of the line. So he has 8 to 12 Both Ferrol and Rochefort were supported by the main Channel Fleet, patrolling between Ushant and the Irish coast, under Admiral William Cornwallis and his deputy, Vice Admiral Charles Cotton, consisting of 15 ships of the line, although they were mainly watching the force of 21 ships of the line at Brest under Vice Admiral Guntherman. 6 Spanish ships of the line and 1 French one were in Port Cadiz, under watch of Rear Admiral John Ord and his 5 ships of the line. Another 6 Spanish ships of the line are located at Cartagena under Admiral San Jacinto. The French naval base at Toulon was home to 11 French ships of the line under Vice Admiral Villeneuve, who was being bottled up by the 12 ships of the line of the Mediterranean Fleet under Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, and each commander had a number of frigates, supes, and brigs at disposal, but these were always in tight demand. And further afield, there was Miss S.E., pursued by Cochrane, sailing around the West Indies, but without making contact with each other. There are also a couple of interesting squadrons under Commodores, sailing around just in case of French privateers and to try and hunt down any French moving groups. And you also have to remember that for roughly every 2 to 3 ships on blockade, they usually have about 1 more going back, either sailing back or sailing there or being victualled up in a port somewhere. So usually they have those ships, the ones assigned to blockade they're counting are the ones on station. They don't include in their numbers the ones which are moving backwards and forwards. Which, of course, could play a part in any battle. Because what might happen, and what often does happen, and you're talking about these battles, is that you might come out of port, or the enemy might be coming out of port. It might take them a full day to get out of port. Now you don't attack them straight away. You're waiting till they get to a point at which you can attack them. So let's say at Trafalgar, they start coming out on the 20th. Early on the 20th. It's the 21st when they're engaged. And the Royal Navy knows this. Nelson knows this. Collingwood knows this because they're watching the frigates. Now, the thing is, when they're coming back out, that's the news. But also, they've got frigates out going around, wandering, collecting other information and making sure they see what else is going on. And if there's any other British ships in the area, they'll get the news the French and Spanish are coming out, and they will go form up the main fleet. So let's say if Strachan's squadron of 5 ships had been sailing nearby, 4 ships and 5 ships, had been sailing nearby and had been spotted by Euryalus, one of the frigates, they'd been signalled. Franco-Spanish fleet are coming out of harbour. Strachan would have then, of course, gone, well, my orders are to carry a sailing this area, hunting these groups. No, he wouldn't. He would have gone, where is Admiral Nelson's fleet? And would have formed up. Same if Louis' squadron, which, this is what Nelson was doing. This is what he sent 5 ships away to get revictualled in Gibraltar, and they are supposed to be coming back to him. So he has 27 in the fleet. He sent 5 away. Okay, he's pushing his figures slightly, but that could have been impossible. He's also sent, of course, Calder's ship away. So he sent 6 away. But again, they could have been, if they had been closer when they come out, they would have been called back. So there is a real system going on. And quite a lot of the system owes itself to John Jervis and owes itself to William Pitt, because between the two of them, they had built up the Royal Navy to be massive. And what you always have to consider about these figures, and these are the figures I've just pretty much copied and pasted the table from Wikipedia, because all I would have done would be written out this table myself. And it just seemed like less sensible use of my time. Although I am going to write out a table at some point, but I want to do that every year, and that's probably going to be in next year's Trafalgar one, because every year I work on making bits of this stuff better. The aim is to have by the 225th anniversary something which is truly world-beating. but all solo produced by myself, which is slightly sad. Maybe I'll try and get some videos recorded with Kate Jameson and Drac and a few other people. Anyway, as you can see in these figures, the Royal Navy in 1794 has 71 third rates in commission. By 1814, it has 103. So this is only the ships in commission, not including the ships in ordinary, which are the ships the ships in refit. These are the ones which have crews and are at sea and are able to go to sea. They have gone from 5 first rates to 7 first rates in commission, 9 second rates to 8 second rates in commission. So they've actually dropped down there. 8 to 10 fourth rates, 78 to 134 fifth rates, 10 to 25 of the smaller sixth rates, and approximately 360 soups of war or unrated vessels versus 75 in 1794. And all I can say is these are the ones in commission. And this is not even the peak year. As far as I can see it, the peak year at the moment is 1806. That's when they have the peak number of ships in commission. They have, in 1805, a lot more ships in commission. And this has a real impact, because whilst Pierre-Charles Villeneuve, commanding from the Beausejour, looks this powerful admiral in charge of this very powerful squadron, you have the realities that the French aren't spending as much time at sea as the British are, and the same the Spanish. You have the fact that the Spanish are probably the better quality admirals and the better and more experienced admirals, and they're certainly the ones who have been least likely to have their heads chopped off in recent years. But the fact is, they're not in charge. The French ones are. Villeneuve has been chosen because he's one of the Naval quartet, and Napoleon thinks he's lucky. I suppose he managed to run away from Nelson before, and then he proves quite good at running away from Nelson in the to West Indies, etc. It's just the third time doesn't prove lucky, or is lucky for Nelson. Who knows? The fact is, they don't have as much experience and as much service time as their British counterparts, and their crews don't have as much service time. So yes, whilst on paper you can look at it on their total number of ships and go, on paper the Franco-Spanish forces hugely outnumber the British forces. Probably true. Do they outnumber them in forces in commission? That's sometimes more of an iffy one. And the real question is, do they outmass them in terms of their logistical support, the ability to project those ships and support those ships, and quickly regenerate those ships? Because when they come back from their sailing across the Atlantic, how long does it take to turn those ships back into something that can go back to sea again? Versus how long does it take the British to turn their ships back into going to sea again? Because, let's be honest, HMS Victory comes back from doing all that. She's been on station in the Mediterranean. She hadn't been in port. Searching around the Mediterranean, the head of fleet. Goes across the West Indies. Comes back to Gibraltar. Then goes up to the Channel Squadron. Stays the Channel Squadron a bit. Then goes into Plymouth. Gets repaired in Plymouth. And is back out again. And is then sent down to do the duty she's doing, do the blockade of Cadiz. That is an incredibly complicated and vital organization in terms of generating ships. And then you have on top of that the experience of the British sailors. The British tend to have a higher density of experienced sailors in their ships versus than the French. The British tend to have smaller crews in their ships, but they can get away with that because they have more experienced crews. They're more experienced sailors. And they tend to also, that's strange, feed them better and look after them in different ways better. There also tends to be a more simplified command structure on a British ship than on a French ship. Why? because quite a lot of French ships have soldiers on them who have their own commanding officers on the ships. And those commanding officers, including the general in the fleet, who is passing on verdicts on Villeneuve, the admiral in charge of the fleet, are there checking also into the political reliability of the officers and whether or not they're following Napoleon's instructions. So you have the fact that an admiral isn't really an admiral in his own fleet, in their own fleet. They are just not. And then you've got Pierre de Montbellebene, who's Napoleon doesn't consider him suitable to run the Toulon squadron. Doesn't consider him a good enough admiral for it. Considering what happens in Trafalgar, considering what happens in Ortegal, which are two battles he's in his entire war experience of. One, he ends up fleeing because he cannot do anything to support his main line. That's what he decides. When in reality, possibly they could have done something, but it would have required a lot more skilled sailors to move themselves around in the wind. And then at Ortegal, he just gets taken out by, at that time, Commodore Strachan's squadron. These are capable fleets. These are capable admirals, but they're just not as capable as their counterparts by a long stretch of the imagination. Federico Gravina, possibly the most capable admiral on the coalitions, on the alliance's side. Certainly the most capable admiral of Napoleon, admiral for the Napoleonic aligned forces at Trafalgar. Had been sent chasing after Villeneuve had visited Cadiz, because, frankly, in both Cartagena and Cadiz, the French had managed to upset the Spanish officials with their attitudes. Can't see where the problem was coming for this. And so the Spanish decided that an admiral needed to basically go after Villeneuve to babysit him. Provide all the first rates in the Franco-Spanish force, and they are gorgeous ships. They do wonderful service, some of them, in the Royal Navy after this war, after this battle. They do good service for in the Spanish. They really put up a hard fight. One of the things you won't necessarily realize until you look deeply into the battle is that the Spanish ships put up a much harder on average fight than their French counterparts. Mostly because they are, like the Dutch, have got a far stronger level of, a far greater depth of naval experience than their French counterparts by this point. Because the French have had good fleets. Please do not do not think I'm saying always the French fleet has always been bad. No, not. But it starts off with them getting rid of all Protestant officers. Then they have various revolutions where they get rid of officers for bad politics. Then they start killing them because of their nobles. And then they start taking them out because they don't necessarily trust them, or because Napoleon just doesn't like them. And so they don't get used. So this has an effect on the officer corps. And then, of course, you start losing battles. And the trouble is, when you lose battles, you tend to lose a lot more from your officers, because they tend to be, a far higher percentage of them tend to be on deck, and a far higher percentage of them tend to be taking leadership positions in things like boarding actions and fighting those, because they lead by example. And as such, when you lose a battle, you can lose a generation of experience that was growing up, and then you need to start recycling them. So Losing one battle is bad. You can recover from that. Losing 2 battles becomes problematic. Losing 3 battles becomes even worse. 4 battles, 5 battles, 6 battles. You're in trouble. Because the trouble is, instead of building up experience and getting an idea of winning a battle, your people get an idea of losing battles, and they start thinking very defensively. The Royal Navy also has another advantage over its counterparts. It has the Colour Admiral system, which makes sense. It makes sense for the Royal Navy because it allows them to get around, well, 3 problems. They have a unified fleet versus the others who are allied operations. 2, this allows them to get around issues with people being promoted based on seniority, because they also have the Yellow Admirals, of the Rear Admirals of the Yellow Squadron, otherwise known as the ones who are sort of retired, who are never theoretically supposed to be used, but as I've said in other videos, actually could have been called up if the Royal Navy had suddenly had to put a lot more ships into commission than it was intending to. Those ships which were in ordinary, and even in the War of Third Coalition, they have a large number of ships in ordinary, sitting around, some being repaired, some being maintained, some being used as pretty much as hulks. But they have them there. And the old theory goes that, well, if we have a major loss, i.e., if you did have your whole Channel Fleet have to go sailing across the West Indies, you could activate ships. And if you were short rear admirals from the various blue, white, and red squadrons, well, the yellow are basically a reserve. If you are short captains for the new ships, i.e., you have very young commanders, you don't have enough experienced captains, you can call on the yellow admirals and go, would you mind being a captain of a ship? And most of them will go, give me my ship. Still an admiral, I'm just acting as captain and commodore of this squadron. You basically go, sorry, we don't have a captain for you. We've got a senior commander, but you're such an experienced officer, you can know this. Yes, of course I can. You can see him. We have a Vice Admiral the White, Horatio Nelson. Now, the first thing here is Vice Admiral the White. Number 6 on this list. Upper bottom half. Not the most senior admiral in the Royal Navy. Please do not think that. Admiral Cornwallis is the most senior one at sea at this point. And he's blued and white. While he's actually promoted while he's in charge of the Channel Fleet. Channel Western Purchase Fleet. This is what you have going on. The Royal Navy has the options of, they get a Rear Admiral, they make him a Rear Admiral of the Blue. They can choose if they make him slightly higher, but okay, Blue. And then, theoretically, you get promoted by seniority through all the ranks. But they can jump you through if you're good, they can not jump you through if you're bad, and they can ignore you and send you off to the Yellow Squadron if you're useless. They have options. This is the point. It allows them to manage people's careers. Nelson is a Vice Admiral the White. Could he have gone on for more senior rank? More than likely. If he had survived the Battle of Trafalgar, what would he have probably jumped to? Well, considering Collingwood jumps from a Vice Admiral of the Blue to a Vice Admiral of the Red, which means he skips a rank, I'm fairly certain Nelson, if he'd been alive after winning the battle, would quite possibly have either skipped to Admiral of the Blue, taking over the vacancy theoretically left by Cornwallis, or might have been made directly an Admiral of the White. Might have been. There isn't a potential. It's unlikely considering Emma Hamilton and other political issues, but it's not it's not impossible. And let's consider this list of experience. This is 2 full columns of battles and wars he's been on. Again, we'll go back to Gravina. That's quite impressive, but not much. And considering what the Gibraltans say about him, from the considering he's involved in the siege of Gibraltar, he must have been really, really good. Pierre de Mort, that's not good. Pierre Charles Villeneuve in charge. Oh, let's see. Battle of Fort Royal in 1781. Battle of the Nile. Well, they lost that one. Siege of Malta. They lost that one. Battle of Cape Finisterre. He lost that one. Despite trying to claim it was a victory. And Battle of Trafalgar. Ooh. There are a few of these that Nelson lost. Especially, he's not really that great at amphibious operations. Nelson, again, anyone who sits there and tells you Nelson is a perfect, amazing admiral and is wonderful in every single way has a huge blind spots when it comes to Nelson. He is an incredibly good admiral, but he's not perfect. He and amphibious warfare are not always something which should be mixed. Cup at Collingwood, his second in command. Vice Admiral the Blue. You know, Vice Admiral the Blue and Vice Admiral the White. Interesting thing. Collingwood have been sent down to take over from Calder, running the blockade, and then Nelson sent down. They are friends, but there is never a point, any question of, oh, we're both vice admirals in the same navy. Oh, which one was promoted first? No need to. You're Vice Admiral the White, your boss. I'm Vice Admiral the Blue. This is also the point at which you realise that they are comparatively junior admirals compared to what some of the press that comes out might have you believe. They are rank 6 and rank 7 of the Admiralty, of the admirals. As a reward, Collingwood will be moved up to rank 5, which means he's then left in charge of the Mediterranean, and pretty much means that if anyone short of an admiral, a full admiral, actually sails into the Mediterranean, he is their boss. And also, if you go to Tyneside, you can actually see some of the Royal Sovereign's guns are there as part of a memorial to Collingwood. He has got less battles experience than Nelson. And this could be said to be on par with some of the Franco-Spanish admirals. But there is a small difference. Collingwood has quite an extensive career, has spent most of those times at sea, and has served in a lot of blockades. And more importantly, has, like Nelson, been schooled by a successive of very capable admirals. This is the other big advantage the Royal Navy has, and it's the advantage the Spanish and to an extent the Dutch enjoy over the French. The fact that the patronage system, for all its ills, because patrons tend to be, in a way, evaluated by the quality of those they patronize, they tend to pick out the smart officers to look after. Okay? Because if you produce an officer and say, I'm pushing for this young officer, he's amazing, and he turns out to be a dolt, you look like a dolt as well, don't you? I'm sorry, this might be something new to you all, but I doubt it is. And to be watching this, if it is new, I'm sorry. But here's the dirty little secret of patronage. You don't give it out to people who are idiots. Yes, because an officer has this is, you can argue, Beatty's problem in World War One. You select officers because of their capability, and if you get sent an officer who basically supporting them is a favor to another friend, that's fine. But before you push them forward, you train them up, because if you don't, and they go out around the world with your stamp of approval on, the value of your stamp of approval goes down. And if you think about it, most of these stamps of approval have to start off when officers are midshipmen going to lieutenant exams. So when they're captain, so you're at the captain level. You might not get to the admiral level if you send out one or two. If one dolt you can possibly get away with. More than one going out, and they'll be looking at you going, well, you can't be that bright, can you, Sparky? Right, if they want to for seniority, you can go into the yellow squadron. If they can say you don't have enough sea time or something, then they might just retire you as a captain. They can come up with ways around these things. So this is what happens in the Mediterranean. Nelson tries to be very, very smart, and he almost succeeds. His idea was, if he pulled back from Toulon and saw at Barcelona, to go to Barcelona, and then pulled into the other channel, then Villeneuve, because he correctly estimated Villeneuve was a bit of an idiot, would come out charging down and would avoid going to because he didn't see Barcelona, would come down the channel straight at him. Now, this is a great idea. One small issue. It's working. Villeneuve is charging towards him, and then, unfortunately, two events happen. First, Nelson's frigates lose contact with Villeneuve. It happens. Two, more problematically, a Spanish merchantman vessel comes up and goes, you know what, the Royal Navy's down there. At which point Villeneuve goes, oh, sugar. And Villeneuve goes off, first to Cartagena, and then to Cadiz, and then across the West Indies. Nelson, whose job is to protect the Mediterranean, immediately goes, oh, good lord, where's he gone? He's not turned up. Searches the Mediterranean, finds out he's not there, goes back, checks Toulon, then goes down past Cartagena to Gibraltar, where one of Ord's squadrons basically goes, the Franco fleet has gone that way and possibly picked up a Spanish fleet. At which point, this happens. And Nelson goes charging across into the West Indies. And arrives there. And he arrives on the 2nd of June. Villeneuve has been there for possibly about a couple of weeks by that point. And then they're dancing around. First of all, Nelson thinks that Villeneuve is south, so he goes south from Barbados, which again is thanks to some bad reports coming in, which if he'd not received, he receives one report which suggests he's gone north, and about 3 or 4 reports which suggest he's gone south. At which point, he goes south hunting for him. But if he'd only received the one report that gone north, he'd have probably found him in the West Indies. Yeah. This is quite a possibility. Nelson could have found the Franco-Spanish fleet in the West Indies. In which case, Finisterre would never happen, let alone Trafalgar. Because they're in a battle. And yes, maybe they'd have got back. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe Cochrane would have formed up with Nelson. Maybe Massey would have formed up with Villeneuve. We'll never know. Because it doesn't happen. Because Villeneuve gets spooked hearing that Nelson's there, despite having orders from Napoleon to basically drop off troops and do all sorts of things out there, and sails straight back and aims for Ferrol. And honestly, Nelson arrives at Antigua the day after Villeneuve has left and goes and starts chasing off after him at high speed. Well, as high you can get an HSL. But he presumes he's going for the Straits of Gibraltar because he's presuming he's going back to Mediterranean. And he can afford to presume that because he sent a dispatch. Dispatch ships have gone back, various frigates have gone backwards and forwards, and going back and forward. And he knows that if he goes north, he will go into the Channel Fleet, which will be up there somewhere. I.e., Cornwallis, who'll be going, "Hello, you've come to see me. Let me explain some things to you about cannon fire." Or he'll have to go to Finisterre, which the Royal Navy's or which the Admiralty have already dispatched another squadron to under Calder. It's already there, but they sent orders and reinforcements his way. The Battle of Cape Finisterre happens. So after the Battle of Cape Finisterre, where Calder manages to, well, let's be honest, HMS Malta manages to take 2 enemy ships. She's surrounded by 5 Spanish ships at one point and fights her way out and captures 2 of them. Again, this might affect your perception. The Spanish ships are some of the, as we've said, the better, more experienced sailors, the more experienced officers, largely better conditioned ships that are being better maintained, and honestly, they've had more consistency in sort of construction and seasoning of wood and all these things, which tend to lead it onto the Spanish ships are better. There's a reason why the British prize the Spanish ships almost more than they do the French ones, especially in operations. They like the French names. They use the French names a lot in terms of carrying on the naming in the Royal Navy afterwards and going as a bit of trolling. But they use the Spanish ships for quite a long time after they get them, whenever they get them. But after that, Villeneuve goes into Cadiz. And by the middle of August 1805, the blockade's been run by the Vice Admiral of the Blue, Cuthbert Collingwood. Rear Admiral at the beginning, and then we won't get started. There are so many rank changes during this year and the previous years. It's just you get in fun. Anyway, Nelson arrives in September to take command, and Caldwell went home early in October. Pretty much, he goes home around about the 7th, 8th, I think. I understand it. There are debates on. Some people think it's as early as the 4th, but we know he doesn't go home immediately. He does hang around for a bit, as Nelson tries to entreat him to stay, and Collingwood tries to. And we have this lovely note from Napoleon from the 8th of September, 1815. If Admiral Villeneuve, instead of entering Ferrol, had contented himself with rallying at the Spanish squadron and had sailed for Brest to join Admiral Ganthermu, my army would have landed. It would have been all over. Because Nelson, when he comes back, checks Gibraltar. They haven't ordered squadron reports. They haven't seen the French fleet passing there. Immediately goes and waits a day just in case he's got ahead of them, and then heads up to the Channel Squadron and combines his forces with Cornwallis. This is the point. The Royal Navy have a lot of squadrons coming around. Cornwallis could call on Keith, Lord Keith, who's against the Dutch, and all those things. They can keep up the pretense of blockade with a single ship at a line and some frigates, signaling backwards and forwards, looking like there's a furious blockade out there while they move the ships out. It might not work. It might work. It might work enough to persuade a timid commander not to come out. Doesn't matter. Anything that buys time allows them, the Royal Navy, to form up a larger fleet. It's not going to get you control. So this is why we end up with the fleets we have at Trafalgar and the fleets we have in both sides. The Allied order of battle is very much the fleet which has gone across the Atlantic and come back. The Royal Navy's order of battle Well, they're completely different almost from the fleet that fought at Finisterre. They are ships. Some of the ships went across the West Indies, some didn't. Quite a lot didn't. Quite a lot of how come from the Channel Fleet and various other squadrons. So they're rested in a way. Fresh ships. Experienced crews, but fresh ships. Again, this is the Royal Navy's logistics working out. This is the infrastructure. This is their mass helping them. This is the whole system the Royal Navy has developed over this the Second Hundred Years' War, and that the French revolutions, the various ones, have actually undermined and destroyed, getting rid of Huguenot officers, the Protestant officers from the Navy. It's great for C'est le Roi. Terrible for the fleet, especially when you have to make a special exception because the most senior and best admiral you have in your fleet is Huguenot. You have to keep him, but his sons and quite a large chunk of the officers he's been training up have to go and serve elsewhere, and some of them actually end up in the Royal Navy, i.e., the British one. Might explain a certain officer I keep mentioning. I have kept talking about Thomas Louis, who is Sir Thomas Louis. He actually did commandership at the Battle of the Nile, and he was second in command of the Battle of San Domingo, and which he became baronet. Dies eventually aboard his flagship in Alexandria Harbour in 1807. Is buried in Malta. But in 1805, he's the one who takes the detached squadron away to Gibraltar to to, to revictual and support them. He is, we know, born to a John and Elizabeth Louis. John is a schoolmaster in Exeter, and family legend maintains that his grandfather had been an illegitimate son of King Louis XIV. Now, that's likely, unlikely, who knows? But what is quite possible is that his grandfather had been one of those children whose parents had to flee France because of the persecution of Huguenots. Quite possible. And the Royal Navy just went, thank you, we will take them. And of course, we have the whole story of the England expects that every man will do his duty. Originally, Nelson wanted confides, but confides would have to be spelled out like duty, and it was going to take 12 pulls anyway up to get this one out, to get this sentence out, whereas there's a combination for expects. So that's the signal that goes. And this again tells you a lot about Nelson. He wants to send out a message to to give the fleet morale. And various comments going around going, "Oh, good lord, how long a message is he sending?" And that's mostly what Collingwood's joking about some points. But it takes 12 flights to put this to send this signal through, which is quite a long time because they all go up one mast, and you put them up one set at a time. So each of these individual ones is a flight which goes up. It wouldn't be hung like it is here. And England expects that every man will do his duty. England is being used as shorthand for the entire United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland at that point, and all the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Ireland, all everything at this point. There are Irish, there are Scots, there are Welsh as part of the fleet. There are Scottish officers, Welsh officers, Irish officers as part of the fleet. There's even more from various other parts of the world and various colonies and various other people who've been just acquired over the time. There are even a fairly large chunk of Americans there, which is one reason that's why I always find it interesting that there's not ever been a sort of a real Hollywood movie about Trafalgar, considering the amount of Americans that are there. Possibly because those Americans were mostly people who fought on the other side during the American War of Independence. Anyway, so this is what we get. The 21st of October. You have Africa. Now, Here's the point about HMS Africa. She is sailing along and comes in and decides, I'm not going to go up behind one of the fleets. I'm going to exercise judgment and attack the fleet from the head. But also, she's been broken off from the fleet during the night. She joined it not that long previously. And she'd had some idea of what position she was supposed to be in, but not quite 100% sure. But Captain Digby doesn't hesitate in actually doing some independent thinking and making a decision for himself. He does it. He's been trained, he knows his skills, he does it. He takes Africa along. And she is a puny little puny little third rate. She is the smallest of third rate you can get. She's a 64 gun. And he just sails her down the line. So much so that some of the French captains think there's a third line behind him. And this is another point to put forward because of the Royal Navy. Nelson can afford to divide, because of the experience of his crews and his officers, can afford to divide his fleet up into two columns. He at one point is offered to command the fleet from Euryalus, the frigate, which he does consider. He considers it. She's a very good, very fast modern frigate. But he decides that you need to lead in the front, and that's why Collingwood's Royal Sovereign is in front of the other column. The admirals aren't back inside their squadrons, inside their columns. They're at the front. Now, again, you sit there and go, well, if Louis had been there and Calder had been there with their ships, where would they have been? Probably there would have been a third column, starters, one heading. And if we get into this, because I have another design I want to bring up, this one. The odds are, when he's putting his fleet together, and when he's forming his formations up, you have to remember the Franco-Spanish force is sailing that way, south. They're heading to try and get to Cartagena through the Straits of Gibraltar. As it is, they reverse. Now, Nelson's aim was always he would aim for the flagship. And the whole point was Collingwood was supposed to be taking the slightly heavier fleet to crank into the fleet in front of the flagship and cross off those ships and therefore slow the formation down. And basically, the two juggernauts would cut the fleet in half and thirds and take it out in the middle. As it is, they reverse, but you can't swap sailing position around, so they're going in. If you'd had enough for third ships, you'd have probably had a third column heading for what was aimed to be the rear, but would have turned out to be the van of the French fleet, and that would probably be the smallest still of the groups. You'd have also at that point had 3 rear admirals in the force. So the odds are you have another rear admiral put into Collingwood's squadron, because that's where it matters most. You have one behind Nelson, in case anything happens to him. I'm not sure why he has that person for you, but he does. And you'd have had a third column. But you don't. You have 2 columns. It's also not completely revolutionary. Other fleets have tried this at other options. Other British admirals have tried a similar attacking methodology. This is one of the things. It's always marketed as this massive revolution. It's not a massive revolution. It's built upon other admirals who've done it and other captains who've done it. For Villeneuve, the idea, he comes up with various ideas to try and, he sees this to an extent coming. Let's try with ideas with Gravina of how to fix it, to form up into 3 columns thick, or 4 sub-squadrons sailing in a box. All sorts of ideas. The trouble is, the fleet really isn't with him, and most of the fleet doesn't actually even want to sail when he decides to sail. So this is one reason they're as strung out as they are, and they're as disparate and disorganized as they are. The Battle of Trafalgar is bloody. It really is. In a live, I went for it hour by hour, but you've got to think about it, what the ships are doing. You've got the frigates dodging around, relaying signals, trying to see what's going on. You've got Africa coming in alone from the top, dancing down the enemy line, just going bang, 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 and taking on them all in turn. A couple of authors write about Royal Sovereign and Victory as if they are these tanks, these juggernauts at the head of lines which are going to charge through. That is to an extent, but it's also missing a point. All ships of the line are to an extent juggernauts. They are huge floating batteries of artillery. They are massive amounts of guns. They carry guns the size of siege weapons for land. They carry hundreds of these things in some cases. They carry enough guns that they would make the battles of Waterloo look like because they just don't have as much artillery. When you're talking about artillery battles in naval engagements, you're talking in terms of thousands of guns, not dozens. So these ships are all juggernauts, but they become emotional juggernauts. You've got two very popular, very respected admirals, Collingwood and Nelson. By leading the fleets personally, they would have done. They could do their duty and could inspire the ships to follow them. That's what they were doing. They were charging through to lead them. Now, in many ways, Royal Sovereign was actually possibly on this day the better ship than Victory because she'd more recently come out of refit. She had a cleaner hull, and Collingwood had really been pushing her. And also, she hadn't just done the double Atlantic. Okay, Victory had had a little quick re-victual stop afterwards, but she'd still done the double Atlantic. That's going to wear you out. Now, question. If Louis and Caudle were there, who would be leading the third squadron, the third column? It would be in Caudle. And the reason I say this is because Nelson, the whole way through, is going in his sort of things, stay here, earn your honor back, silence your critics by winning a battle, because that's how Nelson had done it. Whenever he had critics, he'd gone and fought in battles and won them, and that silenced them. That's a very effective silencing tool. Caldwell has decided to go back and fight it in court martial, and never gets another C appointment afterwards, but does get up the ranks. The thing was, if you'd had Louis and Calder squadron, Louis would more likely have gone into Collingwood's force, and Calder would have led the third column to give Calder the chance to earn his honor back. So there you go. There's the Battle of Trafalgar that could have happened. The 5 ships that Thomas Louis had taken with him were HMS Queen, HMS Canopus, HMS Spencer, HMS Zealous, and HMS Tigra. And the frigate Endymion. So again, you would have had another frigate there if there are including Prince of Wales, which is the Calder's flagship, which is taken away by Calder. You lose 2 second rates, 4 third rates, and a very good frigate. That would have made a very different thing to the battle. It would have meant that the other ships were equal numbers. There would have been 7 on both sides, on frigates and smaller ships. There would have been 6 more British ships, which would have meant it 33 on both sides. It puts a very different spin on the battle if it happens a few days earlier. The battle is always a hard-fought one. And it's a hard-fought win. That's in many ways why it gets the point it does in history, because you are taking a tremendous strategic gamble. We talk when we're talking about World War One and all the other things, of crossing the enemy's T. If you look at this battle plan, you are actually crossing your T for the enemy. You are allowing them to use their broadside against your head. When you can barely fire any guns forward, and not with as much accuracy, and they can use all their fire on you. The difference is there's the pace of combat, there's the accuracy, there's the ability of the crews to do damage control, and there's the devastation once you get close. Because once you get close, you cross their T, and you break up their formation. They outnumber you. Theoretically, they could double you. If you were talking about traditional line of battle tactics, theoretically, at any one point, the Franco-Spanish fleet should have been able to pick any 6 of the British ships of the line and double them. I have have 2 ships focusing on that each one, or maybe pick 3 and treble them and work their way up. Slowly trebling more and more after they take them out. All these are options. Instead, the British plan stops that. It shouldn't have stopped it if you had a well-handled van and they managed to come around to help. They could have still carried out. But instead, the British plan concentrates the British ships in the center. And the enemy, as they come up to them, find themselves being doubled and trebled. And this explains the results. This explains what happens. Because ultimately, naval battles are not just about, in this period, are not just about the number of artillery, the number of cannon, but the way you use them. Now, the big headline figure that's often used to show how stark this battle is that the Franco-Spanish fleet uses 4,395 killed, 2,541 wounded, and 8,000 captured, along with 21 ships of the line. And 1 ship of the line is destroyed. So 22 out of 33. And of those 11, well, they'll lose 2 more trying to rescue some ships. They will lose 5 at the Battle of Alt Eagle, and the French will lose their remaining ships when they decide to declare war, decide to interfere in Spanish internal matters, and end up with their ships being captured. And all this compared to the British fleet losing 458 killed and 1,208 wounded. Differences for this. Well, the French tend to fire on the uproll to try and take out your enemy's sails and masts. This is great for disabling enemies so they can't pursue you if you want to run away. And it theoretically stops them maneuvering, makes them dead in water, and you can pick them out. The British tend to fire on the down roll, which means they hit the hulls. Now, this tends to be where there's quite a large number of crews and tends to kill more of your crew. It's the more preferred option if your plan is to sink or capture your opponent, rather than let them run away. Capturing them, yes, if they have more sails, they can if they still have their masts and rigging, they can sail away. But if they've got holes in the hull and they've lost a lot of crew, sailing is going to be hard, and you're probably going to catch them at some point. There are two sides to the coin. The French operational doctrine always places priority on the operation rather than the battle. They are a use of sea or a sea command force in many ways. The Royal Navy is about control, which enables command. And therefore control involves fighting the battle, which also explains the difference in ship design. The French tend to be slightly longer, slightly narrower, hulls designed for higher speed, whereas the Royal Navies tend to be slightly more, well, honestly, slightly more barrel shaped because they're designed to arrive where they arrive slightly slower but in better condition. And once you have copper bottoming, and especially once you start to get into levels of you have far more experienced sailors on the British side, you end up with things like Nelson anyway, where they actually do outpace their French counterparts. Sometimes in French ships that they have copper bottoms and modified. Nelson, of course, gets killed, which is not good. But both him and Collingwood are running incredible risks so that they can inspire their forces. And this happens. How to put this? This inspiration doesn't just happen. This happens because they've seen previous admirals do it, because it's become a bit of a tradition in the Royal Navy. You inspire and lead your forces when you can from the front. Why? Well, it goes back to an admiral being executed for not being aggressive enough. It has had an impact. You have to be visibly aggressive. You can honestly say the reason why Calder gets into trouble is because he's not aggressive enough. Because he declines combat, declines battle. Because he's got 2 damaged ships and 2 prizes, and he doesn't want to take on a bigger fleet, and he's worried about the possible fleets at Ferrol and Rochefort, and what happens if they come out while he's not been watching them, and they reinforce the enemy of Villeneuve. Which is a legitimate thing to worry about, but to quote Nelson, and it's quite accurate, he seemed to be more worried about the ships which were in his mind than the ships which were in front of him. Nelson and Collingwood, no one had any doubts about them leading from the front. On the 27th of October, after the battle, Collingwood offers the governor of Cadiz to put his Spanish wounded prisoners ashore and set them free. The governor and Gravina offered in exchange to release their British prisoners who boarded the British fleet. The French later joined in this humanitarian agreement after Gravina suitably persuaded them. Now, I have to say, you can talk about the difference in casualties again, just to mention it, in terms of the differing fighting readiness of the fleets and the various, the tactics of Nelson of charging in like he does. But honestly, I would put it more down to the fighting styles of the fleet and the fighting styles of the ships. I'd also say that you have some French ships which really don't engage, and some Franco-Spanish. The Spanish ships all seem to do a pretty good job of engaging. Some of the Franco ships, the 4 at the head, Domar Squadron, don't do that great. They basically do a bang, bang, bang. Oh, we fired ourselves. We can't get back. We're sorry. We're off. which it's going to affect that. It's going to affect the number of casualties you can get. It's also a point that you have to remember. Whilst yes, they're sailing into range, but those most of the firing is concentrated on the Royal Sovereign and on Victory as they're coming in closer and closer because at their heads of the line. And by the time they're inside the fleet, the other ships are pouring into the fleet, and you have to decide whether you're going to fire at the ships which are still coming in, or the ones which are closer and are trying to blow you up. And that indecision can often cause trouble. That indecision takes your time. That is a cool painting. That is Turner's painting. That is a cool one. It's several moments in the battle combined into one, but it's a good picture. And leads rather nicely into this. The summary of the campaign. The summary of the battle. The myth versus the reality. Reality, closer to it. Myth. You don't stop in a battle, even if your admiral goes down. You keep firing, you keep working those guns. And besides, he got carried beneath deck. Ends up lying next to a Royal Marine lieutenant. The Royal Navy takes both a myth and a reality from Trafalgar. The myth is that this is a decisive battle. What defines a decisive battle is the losses on the enemy's side. And unfortunately, that myth infects the public mindset, and therefore every battle that ever comes after it, and even Finisterre, which happened before it, are judged according to the supposed merits of this battle. This is the problem in Jutland, and the problem with Jutland and in World War One and in World War Two. The Royal Navy wins some amazing victories in both wars, but they never match up to the image in the public's mind of Trafalgar. This is despite the fact there are several differences. In those wars, the enemies they're fighting are far more experienced and far more professional in terms of their sailing capability than the ones on the Franco-Spanish fleet in terms of their whole crew, rather than the specific officers, the whole crew capability. There's also the fact that, in the nicest way, steam power has different realities than age of sail in terms of your ability to escape and the speeds of your command and the style of your fighting. But also, most importantly, it forgets what truly makes a decisive battle. And is Trafalgar really a decisive battle? Because it doesn't end the war. The War of the Third Coalition itself goes on to 1806, July 1806. Doesn't end the war. Is it a decisive battle? The enemy loses a lot of ships. Doesn't mean the French fleet stops being a problem or stops being a threat. There's no more big battles for Collingwood to fight in the Mediterranean when he's in charge out there, and there aren't many big battles or any battles at all in the rest of the fleet, but rest of the Atlantic. But the Royal Navy still spends its time blockading ports, escorting convoys, running supplies to support Wellesley and Duke of Wellington and his army, etc. They're doing all that still. The Battle of Trafalgar is held up as a decisive battle. It's fought after the French have already decided to not try and invade that year and to withdraw their fleet to Mediterranean. It is decisive in that it stops there being really a possibility of the French actually ever accomplishing that. Even when Napoleon announces his construction program, all his building programs, and does all the work he does, he has lost too many officers. He has lost too large a chunk of the Navy in one go, and the Royal Navy can outbuild him, and they do. So Trafalgar is a decisive battle in it. Doesn't end the threat, but it removes the potential of the threat re-emerging for the foreseeable future. That's decisive. And it's, of course, a overwhelming victory. So it's decisive. But it's not really a repeatable victory. It's an emulable one. You can emulate it, but you can't repeat it. And that's the ultimate problem with Trafalgar. Because wars aren't like that. Not on Earth. Not at sea at the moment. Ships can always get away. They're not trapped by wind. They're not trapped by the loss of the sailors on the deck who had manned the sails and crewed the sails, so they can't get away. They can't adjust their sails and get away. Because you're not dealing with things at that closer range. You might sink a ship, but you're not going to sink the fleet because they can withdraw. Because it doesn't matter if there's wind or not, they just put on the engine and go. As happens at Jutland. You can argue Jutland is a decisive battle because the Germans don't come out to fight again. Never in that same force. Never the same capability. It ends. You don't know it ends that threat. You maintain the blockade and fleet because you don't know it. You're never going to rely on or assume it. But it does. Trafalgar is a decisive battle. But it's a decisive battle in terms of the Age of Sail and the scale of events that happen in the Age of Sail. And in the context and the geostrategic nuance of the period it is in. Unless technology changes, don't expect another Trafalgar. Expect a Midway. Expect a Matapan. Expect an Operation C. These are all things to expect. Trafalgar, that's to study. That's to learn from. That's to inspire, not to repeat. Really should have talked more about Euroless during this, but well, perhaps she'll get our own video someday. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and this will come out the same day as the Thrawn and Tarkin take over the High Seas fleet and replacing Tirpitz and Shear video live and recorded video. Wish me luck. Take care. Oh, and thank you everyone who's a patron. Thank you everyone for watching. And if you do watch the entire 1 hour and 40 minutes of this, please do me a favor. Comment 140 below. Thank you.